In the snow-covered Alaskan wilderness, a beam of flashlight flickered in the darkness. Mark Wilson, a 28-year-old wildlife conservation officer, tightened his winter coat and continued trudging through the knee-deep snow. At 3 a.m., the cold wind in Denali National Park was bone-chilling, and the thermometer read -30 degrees, but he paid no attention to that. 10 minutes ago, during his routine patrol, he had spotted suspicious footprints and traces of blood. "Hang in there, I must find you," Mark murmured, his binoculars already coated with a thin layer of frost. As an experienced wildlife conservation officer, he could glean a lot from the scattered clues. It was an injured wolf, most likely wounded by a poacher's trap. What worried him more was that, judging by the depth of the tracks, the wolf was probably a lactating mother. The biting wind howled past, dragging Mark's thoughts back to another similarly frigid winter night 16 years ago. Back then, he was only 12, anxiously waiting at home for his father to return. His father, John Wilson, was the most respected ranger in the area, but that night he met with a mishap while pursuing a group of poachers. When the police found John, he had already closed his eyes forever in the blizzard. "If only I could have been by my father's side that day." Mark shook his head, temporarily pushing away the persistent thought. This was not the time for memories. He needed to focus on the search and rescue at hand. Suddenly, a faint wolf howl pierced the silent night sky, filled with pain and despair. Mark immediately changed direction, moving swiftly toward the sound. After passing through a coniferous forest, the scene bathed in moonlight made his heart clench instantly. A large gray wolf lay in a pool of blood, her hind leg caught in a brutal trap, her silver fur stained with crimson. Even more heartbreaking, by the mother's side, a roughly 3-month-old wolf pup kept nudging her with its nose, letting out sorrowful whimpers. "Damn poachers!" Mark gritted his teeth, quickly examining the mother wolf's injuries. The wounds were too severe, and the blood loss too great. Even immediate medical treatment would hardly save her. The mother wolf seemed to understand her time was short. She used the last of her strength to gently lick the pup's face, as if bidding a final farewell. At that moment, the distant rumble of engines approached. Mark became instantly alert. The poachers were coming back. He had to make a quick decision. If he left the mother and pup, he might catch the poachers, but if he did, the young pup would surely die. Seeing the fearful look in the pup's eyes, Mark thought of his 12-year-old self. Back then, he had also helplessly lost his most important family member. A bold idea flashed in his mind. Perhaps this was heaven's way of giving him a chance to save another life and make up for past regrets. The mother wolf seemed to read Mark's thoughts. She gave her pup one last look, then turned her weak gaze to Mark, as if pleading with him to care for her child. Mark knelt down, gently stroking the mother wolf's head until he felt her life finally fade away. The engine sounds grew louder, and Mark could not delay any longer. He took off his coat and carefully approached the shivering pup. "Come on, little one, trust me," he whispered, slowly extending his hand. The pup stepped back a few paces but, miraculously, did not run away. Perhaps it recognized the kindness in Mark's eyes, or maybe it instinctively knew this was its last hope. As Mark wrapped the pup in his coat, the pickup truck's headlights illuminated the forest. He quickly concealed himself and the pup behind a large tree, holding his breath. 2 heavily armed poachers got out of the truck, flashing their torches around. "Where's the wolf? We heard the sound coming from this direction. It can't have gone far, keep looking." Mark held the trembling pup tightly, feeling its rapid heartbeat. At that moment, he made up his mind. No matter the cost, he would protect this little life. Bringing the wolf pup safely back to the cabin was not the end of the story but the beginning of another challenge. As a professional wildlife conservation officer, Mark knew that adopting wild animals was strictly forbidden. Yet, looking into those fearful and bewildered eyes, he knew he couldn't let go. "We need to give you a name," Mark said softly, gazing at the little wolf curled up in the corner. Moonlight streamed through the window, casting a shadowy glow on the pup's silver-gray fur. Let's call you Moonshadow, since we met under the moonlight." However, Moonshadow was unappreciative. For 3 whole days, it refused to eat, curling up by the fireplace, watching Mark's every move with wary eyes. Whenever Mark tried to approach, it would let out a low growl, baring its sharp little teeth. At night, the pup's heart-wrenching howls broke the silence, filled with sorrow. Mark knew he had to earn Moonshadow's trust. He tried various methods, offering warm goat's milk, fresh minced meat, even rabbit meat, but Moonshadow remained defiant, seemingly using hunger strikes to protest the loss of its mother. On the morning of the 4th day, Mark checked on Moonshadow as usual. This time, he brought something special, his father's favorite checkered shirt. "You know," he said softly to Moonshadow, "I've lost someone important too. That kind of pain, I understand more than anyone." Perhaps Mark's sincerity touched Moonshadow, or maybe it simply couldn't resist hunger any longer. When Mark placed the meat soaked in goat's milk before it, Moonshadow hesitated briefly before finally lowering its head to eat. Watching the pup gobble up the food, Mark's eyes welled up with tears. However, new problems soon arose. As Moonshadow grew accustomed to its new environment, it began to show its untamed nature. Mark's cabin became its playground, curtains were shredded, furniture clawed, and paw prints covered the floor. Worse, it started treating Mark's boots and clothes as toys, often running around the house with his socks in its mouth. "Hey, little rascal." Mark tried to keep a straight face, but seeing Moonshadow's mischievous antics, he couldn't help but laugh. It reminded him of what his father used to say, "Every creature has its personality, we must learn to appreciate it, not change it." But the real test came later. One morning, the park supervisor, Thompson, paid an unexpected visit. Seeing Moonshadow, his face turned grim. "Wilson, you know it's against the rules to adopt wild animals." Thompson scolded, "This wolf must be sent to the Wildlife Rescue Center immediately." Mark's heart sank. He knew the rescue center was indeed a more professional choice, but he couldn't imagine life without Moonshadow. Just then, Moonshadow walked over to Mark, gently nudged his leg, then warily stared at Thompson, growling softly. The sight stunned Thompson. He stared at the unusual scene for a long while before finally sighing, "Wilson, your father was my most respected colleague. For his sake, I'll give you 1 month. But if by then you can't prove you can care for it properly, it must be sent away." Watching Thompson's retreating figure, Mark knelt down, gently stroking Moonshadow's head. "Did you hear that, little one? We've got only 1 month." Moonshadow tilted its head at him, seemingly understanding, and softly licked his hand. From that day, Mark embarked on a rigorous training plan. He needed to prove that genuine bonds could form between humans and wild wolves, just as his father always believed. And this was just the beginning of their story. As the harsh winter waned, Denali National Park welcomed the breath of spring. Outside Mark's cabin, the melting snow revealed patches of fresh green. Over the month, both Mark and Moonshadow underwent profound changes. Initially, the training didn't go smoothly. Although Moonshadow accepted Mark's care, its wild nature made it defiant. Sometimes, just as Mark taught it not to scratch indoors, he would find his favorite leather boots chewed beyond recognition. Yet, Mark remained patient, using methods his father had taught him, understanding, respect, and persistence. "Remember, little one," Mark often said to Moonshadow, "we're friends, not master and pet." He developed a unique training approach. Instead of commanding, he used games and rewards. Each time Moonshadow learned a new command, Mark rewarded it with fresh rabbit meat. Gradually, Moonshadow began to understand human language, even distinguishing simple hand signals. Mark was most surprised by Moonshadow's extraordinary intelligence. During a patrol, Moonshadow suddenly perked up its ears and led Mark off their usual route. They discovered a new poaching trap, preventing a potential tragedy. From then on, Moonshadow became Mark's most reliable partner, its keen senses and instincts helping them uncover many poachers' trails. However, spring brought not only warmth but new challenges. One evening during a routine patrol, distant howls echoed. Moonshadow tensed up, ears erect. It was the call of the wild wolf pack, an irresistible summons embedded in its blood. Watching Moonshadow's reaction, Mark felt a pang of bitterness. He knew this day would come. Moonshadow was a wild wolf, and its heart yearned for freedom. Each night, as distant howls echoed, Moonshadow would stand by the window, gazing wistfully into the distance. Late one spring night, everything changed. Mark received a report about a group of armed poachers entering the reserve. These men were well-equipped and ruthless, targeting rare animals, and now they had their sights set on a pack of wild wolves recently seen in the park. "We have to stop them," Mark told Moonshadow. But this time, it could be dangerous. Moonshadow's eyes met his with determination, as if saying, "I'll go with you." Under the moonlight, they tracked the poachers. Moonshadow's wild instincts proved crucial, accurately detecting human scents and tracks. Suddenly, Moonshadow stopped, its fur bristling. Mark knew they were close to their target. Then, a gunshot shattered the silence. Mark's heart sank. The poachers had begun their hunt. They hurried towards the sound, but were ambushed en route. Two masked men emerged from the trees, guns pointed at Mark. "Don't move," one sneered. "I know you, the meddling ranger." At that critical moment, Moonshadow sprang at the poachers like lightning, catching them off guard. Mark seized the opportunity to call for backup. Amid the chaos, a gunshot rang out, and Moonshadow collapsed with a painful howl. "Moonshadow!" Mark cried out, heartbroken. But then, shadows emerged from the woods, the wild wolf pack. Drawn by the gunfire, they saw their injured kin and attacked the poachers. The battle raged until the police arrived, finally subduing the poachers. Moonshadow was gravely injured but, fortunately, survived. During its recovery, the wolf pack lingered near the cabin, their nightly howls calling to Moonshadow. Mark knew it was time to make a decision. "Do you want to return to them?" Mark gently stroked Moonshadow's fur, his voice choked with emotion. Moonshadow looked at him with complex eyes, first licking his hand softly, then walking to the door and looking back. Mark understood. He opened the door, watching Moonshadow limp towards the waiting pack. But to his surprise, Moonshadow didn't immediately join them. It stopped, turned back, and let out a soft, tender howl. At that moment, Mark realized, Moonshadow had chosen a middle path. It didn't want to abandon its wild nature, nor did it want to leave the person who gave it a second chance at life. From then on, Moonshadow often roamed the reserve with the pack, serving as a unique bridge between humans and wolves. It would occasionally return to Mark's cabin, bringing news of the forest and helping him protect this sanctuary. Years later, people often saw a silhouette of a man and a pack of wolves under the moonlight, their figures stretching across the snowy landscape. They guarded this land, telling a story of trust, courage, and a bond that transcended species. As Mark's father once said, true guardianship isn't about control, but understanding, not possession, but fulfillment. This special bond would forever endure in the vast expanse of Denali. The story is told, but Mark and Moonshadow's tale continues. Have you ever had unforgettable memories with animals? Feel free to share your story in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe, so more people can feel this warmth.